Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to the Augmented Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Blue Leaf. On this episode of the show, John Prendergast and I are joined by Carl Richards, creator of The Behavior Gap. Now, Carl's job title, creator, is an operative word for today's show because we are going to be exploring a creative process that you can use to better connect with your clients, prospects, and referral partners. What does creativity have to do with serving your clients? Everything. As you'll hear Carl share, your ability to successfully advise your clients is all about an iterative process of discovering what allows you to best articulate complex problems and solutions to those problems so that your clients can understand them and take action. This is a fantastic episode and you are absolutely going to love it. Now, before we get to the conversation with Carl, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, feel free to hit us up. Shoot us an email, podcast@blueleaf.com, or swing by the website and use that little contact button, or find us on the socials. Blue Leaf, John, myself, we're all active on LinkedIn, Twitter, and everywhere else, basically. And we're super easy to find. Okay, let's get to our conversation with Carl Richards and his amazing beard. You'll see. Here we go. Well, Carl Richards, John Prendergast, welcome to the Augmented Advisor Podcast. It's so wonderful to see you both.
Woo! Cheers. Super excited to be here. Yeah.
I know, right? It is awesome. Like, by the way, I don't know what set me off. Anyone who was here before, we clicked the record button. We had to do several takes because this guy messed up the takes. You know what it is? For those of you who are listening, you're going to want to jump on the video because Carl has this magnificent beard and I got some beard envy here. So I'm kind of a little jealous. He claims this is only 6 months worth of growth. And I'm like, well, I do trim this, but like, I don't think I could ever do something so magnificent. So
thank you. It's super kind of you. Yeah, it's the first time it's the first time in 20 months anybody's commented on anything related to hair and me. It's great.
Hey, as a fellow bald,
look,
we're aerodynamic, dude. It's just no.
Man, guys, I'm feeling pretty left out here. I'm no facial hair, and I have hair on the top of my head. I'm
perfect.
I must.
You can shave your head.
Is this the right podcast?
Anytime you want, shave your head. It's just, you know what, less work for you. Just get out of the shower, dry, and go. It's nice and easy.
Unbelievable. So excited to have you here, Carl. And we were talking there just before we came on air, and it's been a long time since you and I spoke. And we met way back when my company was starting, Blue Leaf, and when Behavior Gap was just brand spanking new. So I am thrilled to have you here and get a chance to talk about stuff that we started talking about over a decade ago. So that's really exciting.
For sure. It's really crazy I was just having this conversation actually with Alan Moore and Michael Kitces, and just thinking about like 15, 20 years ago, like first meetings with all of us, like how much things have changed, and the just sort of blessing of being involved and seeing the industry move a certain direction. It's just been super cool. So yeah, it's great to be here and just reflect on all that stuff, and then maybe even more important, talk about like where are we going? You know what I mean?
I love it. Well, to start with, I was sort of peripherally there when it all started with Behavior Gap, but I figure our audience would love to hear the story about how you came up with Behavior Gap, how that happened, what that aha experience that led you to focus on this really interesting communication style you've developed so uniquely, and how you've learned to communicate those complex ideas in such a simpler way.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I want to be careful of revisionist history, or I actually call it success porn. I'm like not a fan of success porn where we look back and say, oh, it's just follow these simple steps. So I want to make sure I'm not doing that. And that's clearly not what you were asking, but I want to make sure it's really clear to all the listeners, like I had no idea, right? I had no idea. I'm not very good at strategically looking forward at what I should do, but I'm pretty good at following tailwind. And normally the tailwind has to be pretty strong for me to notice it. But once I notice it, I'm like, oh, I should go that way. So what happened was I got in the industry by accident. I applied to be a security guard. That's what I thought I was applying for. It actually said securities. I didn't know the difference. When I got halfway through the interview and they hadn't asked me about kung fu and self-defense and they were talking about stocks and bonds, I was like, whatever. I don't know what that means. But it tells you about the applicant pool that day because I got the job. So I got into the industry by accident, but quickly realized like, whoa, this isn't a math job. I thought, okay, it's not a security guard job. It must be a math job. And then I noticed all these feelings floating around the room, like I had a national call center at Fidelity Investments and there was feelings everywhere. And I was like, what is going on? Like, I thought this was a math job and nobody else seemed to see the feelings either, but I could see them. And I didn't make any grand conclusion. I just remember being sort of struck by the emotion. So then you fast forward a couple years, and I'm now a financial advisor at a big brokerage firm that will go unnamed, but has a bull as its symbol, is owned by a bank. And I'm trying to give advice to clients, and I have these repeated moments, which I think everybody listening will relate to, where I'm sitting at a table across from some really smart people who are called my clients. They're really successful, really smart, and I'm trying to describe a concept that I believe is important for them to understand as we're trying to make this decision. Something like risk or diversification or volatility or asset allocation, any of those words. And I'm just getting blank stares. And I remember who it was, a doctor and a really highly technical technology salesperson. So like almost like an engineer and a doctor. And I'm trying to describe it, I'm just getting blank stares. So it's clearly not their fault. And so out of an act of desperation, and I'd never done this before, I had no art background, as will be obvious to anybody who's seen my work. I wasn't a doodler, right? Like I just, in an act of desperation, I was like, no, like this. And I stood up at the whiteboard that happened to be in the conference room I was borrowing. And I drew it was probably like a square and a circle and an arrow or something. And I remember the feeling, like it was, oh, I get it. I think they said, oh, I get it now. Right. But the feeling was understanding, like, whoa. So I didn't make any grand conclusion, but I noticed it. And the next time, which was probably like the same day, I ran into something where I had the same feeling. I was like, wow. And I, on the yellow pad, and, I kept having that experience on the napkin at lunch, like literally like the, sort of metaphorical napkin, actually the napkin at lunch one time I remember. And so that's where that started, was just like, and then the second part of your question, like, how do you do it? I again, this is me sort of breaking it down from now, like being asked this question probably 5,000 times over the last 20 years. And
it's
really
good to know I'm original, Carl.
Well, no, but really, like it's a good question, and I've had to really think about it. I mean, I've had to spend, and I've done a bunch. It turns out I've done a bunch of consulting now on it, like how to take large, complex problems. I got asked to consult with a big company who makes jet engines, and I was like, I don't know anything about jet engines. They're like, yeah, but it doesn't really matter. And I was like, whoa, that's true. It turns out it's not just money. So what I do in my head is I'm trying to get to the simplicity on the other side of complexity. So not to be confused with simplistic, right? Which is on this side of complexity. In my head, I dive into a problem and I just don't have room for it to like save all the complex part. I consider the edge cases and the nuance and the what about this. And then after all that feels very hectic to me. Like I don't like it. I mean, I've learned to love it, but I used to feel really almost like anxious about it. Like, and I had to resolve it. Right. And now I know the feeling well enough to know, oh yeah, I'm in that place. I call it the messy middle, right? Like I'm in that place where this is what it's supposed to feel like. Let me give you an example. If you need to buy new running shoes and you try to do some research, the feeling I'm talking about. Like if you read the reviews on Amazon, you don't get more clarity. You leave more confusion. Oh, yeah. It's frustrating. And well, that's what it's supposed to feel like. Right. And then the sketch comes from this moment of almost like anger is not the right word, but just like, like this like frustration to wrap it all up. And what's required to get to that simplicity on the other side is explore the problem, talk to people, see angles, do your research, read reviews, da 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 da. And then at the end, you've got to make some really calculated decisions about what to leave out. And in my mind, I'm just like, no, it's this. This is the thing. And when I do it right, which isn't very often, but when I get it right, we're left with a souvenir of the experience we had in the messy middle.
That's really important to think about. I think, I don't know if I'm quoting it. I think it's attributed to Einstein a lot. The whole, like, if you can't take a concept and articulate it really succinctly, you don't really understand it all that well. So maybe it's not Einstein, but I think I've always heard it attributed to him somehow, and I butchered the heck out of it. But, I always love when somebody gives me the feedback like, oh, that I understand that now. It's like, it's simpler. And I think most advisors are trying to do that for their clients, and they're doing exactly what you've described. They're taking this feedback loop, right? Oh, let me try this. And if all of a sudden the client's nodding their head like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. They're like, okay, I'm going to do more of that, right? That's kind of what you were describing happened to you in the beginning, right?
Yeah. What I think is, like, the only suggestion I have about this is to just practice it.
Yeah.
Right. To be a little intentional, like what you just described. Most advisors don't know they're doing that, but if we can just start knowing we're doing that. And Ramit Sethi's taught me a lot about this. Like, Ramit likes to test questions, and he'll notice, like, his great example was that, he does this all the time. I do this all the time now too. Somebody will ask me what I do. Somebody would ask Ramit what he did for a living, and he would say, I'm a writer. And he would notice and he would pay attention. And the answer he would often get is, oh, yeah, so am I. Or so's my brother. And he was like, yeah, your brother's sitting in your parents' basement in his underwear. Like, that's that. And so he changed it to,
I'm not that kind of writer.
Yeah. Then he would say, I'm an author. And it's a different response. Like, like, so that's not important.
Yeah.
What's important is the paying attention to the testing. And if I had one suggestion around the work advisors do, is just pay attention, particularly to the questions you ask. Like, practice a question and see. You're looking for the beautiful question, right? And if you practice a question, you're like, oh, that didn't generate one. Okay, let's try this. Think of it as a play that you're rehearsing, right? Yeah. And if we can get that way, we can start to make our interactions much more. Just notice what happens is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I think the magic of what you do is that souvenir you described is a way of making that messy middle and your pattern recognition of it concrete, right? And I think for abstract thinkers that's a more challenging leap, but you've learned to be, or maybe you always were, sort of a more concrete thinker, right? And so you've got this way that you produce this souvenir, and I think that's some of the real magic that's what's drawn so many people to the work that you do in communicating financial ideas.
Well, that's kind of you. I mean, I think of it as, I think we do the same thing. A good logo is the same thing.
Yeah. Like,
that's just an artifact of a bunch of meaning. And what's interesting about like naming your child is very similar, right? Like, you're trying to capture some meaning that you and your spouse have about that. And what's interesting about the naming of the child and the logo is, at first, we almost named our son Sam is his name. We almost named him Pete. And I still am occasionally like, I think about that and I'm like, no, he's clearly Sam. But that's because he's had 21 years to embody that name, and the logo is the same. So sometimes we put a little too much pressure on the initial artifact and don't realize, like, there's going to be, I think of it as emotional patina gets built up around it. So now, like, the fear greed sketch, that means so much to so many people. And at first, when I first put it out, people were literally like, this, like, my 7-year-old could have done this.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Now, so I think this idea of just, like, don't be too precious about it, but whenever we simplify anything, it requires us that we lose some nuance, and sometimes we get that wrong. Like there are simple answers that are also wrong,
Yeah.
and so the art of it to me is like just having an opinion about what you think matters. There's a bunch of tricks you can take. Like the reason I do this with Sharpie and cardstock is because the Sharpie is a blunt instrument. You can't get fine. You're forced. Like it's a forced constraint. The reason I love Twitter is because it's a forced constraint. So anyway, that's some of the thinking behind it.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of value there. When I was thinking about this conversation we're going to be having, this concept that from the military kept on popping into my head. It's called breaking it down Barney style. I'm not sure if you've ever heard that, but it's like Barney the dinosaur, right? And in the military, particularly, when soldiers are in like the theater of war, there is no room for ambiguity and lack of, like, oh, I thought you meant this, right? It's really important that either if I'm giving you an order, an instruction to do, it's going to be very simply understood down to the lowest man on the totem pole. Or if you're giving me feedback, you've got to be able to articulate it really simply. So you'll often hear like a commanding officer will say, break it down Barney style so I can get it. And then I can articulate this type of stuff.
Do we have time for a quick, can I tell you a quick story?
Sure, please do. I love stories.
This is super important. So there's a financial advisor, his name's Jeff. Jeff, and this is sort of context for the punchline. Jeff, I live in Park City, Utah. I spend a lot of time in the mountains, climbing the mountains, and I'm very comfortable moving around in places where people would not be comfortable. Places where I'm not going to fall, but if I fell, I would die. But I'm not going to fall. But somebody else in that situation would be very nervous. So anyway, Jeff's a big wave surfer. He surfed in Fiji on 12-foot waves over coral reefs. Like I was like, man, he knows his way around. He's got a place out here in Park City. He comes out. He tries to come out every month. He's training for an event where you do 29,000 vertical feet. There's an event called Everesting or something, and you hike up, ride the gondola down, hike up, ride the gondola. So he's in shape. So the whole time training this summer, I'm training for a big event, but it's up in the ridges and on the mountains. And so I'm always like, Jeff, you want to go on a hike? He's like, no, I got to keep training for this. And I don't like to go down very much because it's bad on my knees. I'm like, okay, fine. Just a couple weeks ago, he came out. He's like, hey, do you want to go on a mountain bike ride? He did his event, congratulations, by the way, 29,000 vertical feet. He does his event, comes back out. It's like, do you want to go on a mountain bike ride? And I texted him and said, no, I'm going to go for a run up in the mountains. Why don't you come with me? And he's like, I'm going on a mountain bike ride. So I sent him a picture of this ridge, this knife ridge that I had just been up with my daughter. And it's a picture of my daughter on this ridge. And he replies like, that's beautiful. Call me. So I call him and I said, so he's got a picture. And then I say to him, Jeff, it's super fun. Are you comfortable with exposure? I say. And he's like, yeah, cool. Pick him up in the morning. It's dark. We're driving up the canyon. And you see this knife edge ridge in the dark. And I'm like, that's where we're going. And then things got quiet. We parked the car and we're starting to walk through this boulder field to get up to the place where we get on the rock on this knife. This isn't rock climbing, but some people might think it is, but whatever. So we're up there and I'm like, hey, Jeff, that's where we're headed. Don't worry. It's awesome. There's a couple places you could fall. If you fell, you'd die, but I promise you will not fall. It's totally quiet. And I'm like, wait, he has a picture. He said he was okay with exposure. So I said to Jeff, hey, just check it in here. You told me you're okay with exposure, right? And he's like, Carl, I thought you were talking about sun. Now, what I was talking about, if you Google exposure and heights,
if you climb,
If you've ever spent much time in the mountains, you know what I'm talking about, which is if you fall, you could die, but you probably won't because it's not super technical. And I was like, oh no. And we got through it mainly because he had an ability to regulate based on surfing. So he had an ability to be he was super scared. But he wanted to push through, he wanted to go, and we got through it safe. It took us a long time, but it was awesome. And he was like, that's the best thing I ever did. But the lesson to me is words matter. And if you think a word means a certain thing, and the other person thinks it means a different thing, there could be real consequences. I'm mainly thinking around the work that advisors do. That you have no idea how many emails I got, right? The New York Times column ran for 10 years every week. I got hundreds of emails. And you have no idea how many emails said, could you please tell them, the advisors, to stop using those words? Because I don't know what it means. And risk is maybe one of the best ones. Because when we think risk, we think standard deviation within known bounds.
Yeah. Volatility.
Yeah, like we can measure it. What the client is thinking when you say risk, we have a word for it. It's called uncertainty, but they don't know that. They're thinking, am I going to end up under a bridge?
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, that's the point, is words matter. Barney style, break it down, make sure you're on the same page.
That's a really great example. I mean, it truly is, because we all do that. We have an assumption that the other person knows what we're saying. You know, in this industry, it can be really risky. You're using things like beta and alpha. You're literally using Greek sometimes when you're talking about something.
Stuff that people wanted to forget as soon as they could. And let me just mention one last thing. I didn't mention, it never occurred to me, ever. It never occurred to me when I said exposure that somebody else might have been thinking sun or wind. And as soon as he said it, I was like, oh, right, totally. Like I completely blew it, right? So it's so interesting how quickly that you can sort of have the light bulb go on.
That's
Carl, I think it's an interesting thread too, because all of your examples tie back to this first thing you mentioned when you were getting into the industry, where you could see the emotion, right? All of these are emotionally charged situations, and it seems to really amplify the potential for misunderstanding and maybe the consequences. And I'm curious how you've seen that evolve as you've sort of refined the way that you deal with these situations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand that we all think that money, if you're taught anything about money, you're taught that it's a math problem, right? It'll fit into a spreadsheet and calculator. And then in the industry, speaking broadly, but particularly among like real financial advisors and planners, like we all think it's just a race to who has the best calculator, who can get the assumptions the best, who has the biggest spreadsheet, who has the most designations behind their name. And it turns out money is most like, to me, it's most like an electric fence that you didn't know was electric when you touched it. And therefore, it's surprising to you that, like, wait, I just opened the American Express bill. Why are we fighting? And we just keep repeating that. Like, I thought, I think the biggest problem is that we don't have in our heads, wait, this has the potential to be a charged conversation. And it's so crazy to me that we don't, because it's like, turns out money is the fuel for unfortunately, right? Money is the fuel for everything you care about. Like I could just tell you story after story after story of those sorts. Like, how about this? My friend is in an accident. He's super injured up in the Teton Mountains and near Jackson Hole, and his wife gets a phone call, and he's going to be in a hospital in a small mountain town. And hospitals are expensive, but hospitals in small mountain towns are even more expensive. And they're not sure if he's going to ever walk again. And she relates the story to me, and I could tell you versions of the story, probably 100 different versions from other people, that her first concern is my husband going to be alive? But her second thought, they had recently started, they had recently left their big corporate jobs to start a business, and it just hadn't occurred to them in the rush to get the business started that insurance is important, and you can fault them for that, whatever, but I can totally see how that would happen, right? And her second thought is, how are we going to pay for this? Right? So don't tell me this all fits in a spreadsheet. Like over your kid, like that's how about the other side? Like your dreams for your kids. And so, I think we just need to recognize, and the art of this comes in, like, nobody comes to your office asking to cry on your couch. They come with a presenting problem that normally has to do with math. And we have to take them from that spot. And I think do it through a series of righteous tricks and deep empathy, not like punches in the face, but deep empathy, take them from that spot and help them understand why that's super important. We got to understand why first and lead them down this path to what I think of as real financial planning.
It's really, I would love those examples because it's so true how emotionally charged this is, right? I mean, on every level. I mean, everybody's money journey is different, right? They grew up in a different household, which had its own emotions around money, right? You know, we have a society where if you have a lot of money, sometimes you feel uncomfortable with the fact that you have a lot of money and other people have less money than you. And if you don't have enough money, you feel like I'm a failure. I haven't achieved what I was supposed to. I should have more money than this, is all these things. And then you throw in the curveball of like, oh, by the way, most people, even those who are wealthy, know very little about how money works. They don't know much about investing. That's why they're coming to a financial advisor. They don't actually understand this stuff. They're a doctor. They're an engineer, as you were describing with those clients earlier in the conversation. That's why they're there with you. And maybe you have less money than the person across the table, but they're counting on you, right? And so you've got to help make sense.
Yeah. And
the fascinating thing, Carl, about what you said to me is that what hit me was, if you really think about it, money isn't anything but meaning, right? There is no other thing that it is. It doesn't represent a thing anymore. It represents the things you want it to mean. And it's amazing both as individuals that we don't recognize that, but also as an industry that as practitioners, maybe we're realizing it more. And I'd like you to talk more about this idea of real financial planning, because I think it's going to head in the direction that I'm hoping around this emotional connection to money.
Yeah. So, I mean, the easy definition to me is that real financial planning or real financial advice, and that even me having to say that is a whole nother discussion. Like, why don't we know what this is called? It's fascinating to me. But real financial planning is the never-ending process of aligning your use of capital. And when I use the word capital, there's always an asterisk next to it. And the asterisk is time, money, energy, and attention. So aligning those four uses of capital: time, money, energy, and attention. The never-ending process of aligning your use of capital with what's important to you. Right? That, to me, is real financial planning. Is aligning your use of capital with what's important to you. And it turns out both sides, I always think of that as a Venn diagram, aligning your use of capital. We eventually, ideally, will never get there, but ideally it would just look like one circle, like total overlap. But most of the time there's a gap, right? Like my use of capital is not even, there's no overlap. Like this is crazy. But what's interesting is both sides of that Venn diagram, if you will, or both sides of the equation even, are hard work. Like I used to think the what's important to you part was the easy part. Like in fact, I think it's so easy that I'll just put it on my questionnaire that you fill out in the foyer and I'll call it like, what are your goals? Right? Well, no, that's so hard. Right? Like people don't know what their goals are. We got to get under goals, which I think of as purpose, which I like. We got to create, and I have a dream that there will be a time in the industry where everybody will have one of these, a statement of financial purpose. We got to create a statement of financial purpose. We got to help people understand what their goals are. We got to deal with mimetic desire and Instagram. And like, it turns out nobody knows what they really desire. This is all from Rene Girard's work on mimetic desire. And if anybody cares about it, Luc Bourgeot's book called Wanting is insanely good at helping you understand it. Once you understand the cocktail in here, you're like, wow, now you understand. I think one of the biggest values financial planners provide is goal clarification over time. And if you understand all that, plus some of the work from complexity theory around the fact that humans and their money are actually a complex adaptive system, and it's cute that we operate as if it's a simple system or a complicated system. It's a complex adaptive system. If you understand all that, now you understand like real financial planning is actually this never-ending process of being a little less wrong tomorrow. Not the thing we think it is, which is being precisely correct today so I can draw a 30-year line. It's like, can I just get oriented about where I am, have a guess about where I want to go, that guess we can hold as a strong opinion loosely held, and then can we actively, and I love this phrase from the literature, like can we actively look for disconfirming evidence Like, let me just state this another way. Can we actively look for ways we are wrong? That's so counter to what we try to do as humans. If we actively look for disconfirming evidence, then we can be a little less wrong tomorrow. And then you start realizing, I'm almost done with this rant, you start realizing that your value, the value you provide, is in finding, seeing the ways you were wrong when you started and guiding clients through that. And that's actually the only way. This isn't some cute idea. Another phrase I often use is reality-based financial planning. Like, this is the only way to plan in reality. And it's cute that you think you can plan with that cute little line that you drew, but the only thing we know about that line is it's wrong. We just don't know how yet. So what if we started behaving that way? What if we started embracing uncertainty? It leads to a whole new skill set, like navigating uncertainty, making decisions with incomplete information, all of those things. But I think it turns out that's reality. So all these other efforts are just doomed to fail.
And you make it, that new skill set, it smells an awful lot like entrepreneurship, right?
It's
dealing with the nature of uncertainty day to day. But I was also struck, I had this voice in my head while you were speaking, but Carl, I'm a math guy, and I got into this business to provide my clients certainty. You're wanting me to talk about uncertainty? Are you nuts?
Yeah, that word is one of my favorite words. Like, I think we're at great risk. One of the reasons I would, and I should have started this whole thing with, like, I'm sure I'm wrong about this. Like, that's fine. I bet 50% of what I'm going to say is wrong. Your dilemma, listener, is you don't know which 50%, and neither do I. But one of the things I'm going to say, I have a strong opinion about, and my wife says I have to say this every time, like, I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. So now we got the disclaimer out of the way. One of the things I have a strong opinion about is this certainty word. Like, I think one of the reasons we are the second most least trusted industry below car sales. The good news is we always have Facebook to look down on, right? They're less trusted than us. But one of the reasons we're the least trusted, we've been promising something we can't deliver. We've become sellers of certainty. And selling certainty is really easy to do because everybody wants it. But selling certainty is easy to do, but it's impossible to deliver. So we've set ourselves up for a cycle of disappointment. We promise you a thing, and we don't look, the good ones, your audience, like the good ones, we don't even really know we're doing this, but the language we use, the tools we use, this precise 30-year line, we use tools like I'm 97.28% confident, right? Like, if you have a Monte Carlo that has a decimal place in it, like, we've got this false sense of precision. And so the dilemma with that is, if you sell certainty, your clients will be disappointed. You'll feel a little bad because you're a good one, right? So you feel a little bad. Maybe you feel a little defensive. That leads to you spraying people with facts and figures when they get worried.
Oh, the telephone book.
Yeah, you gotta tell them about the 10 best days, and you gotta pull out all these charts. Instead of what they really want when they're scared is a hug and some empathy. And so I am not saying, here's what's interesting, is what we have to do as an industry, and as a profession inside an industry, what we have to do is get comfortable with two competing truths at the same time. This is just a requirement of adults, is the tension between these two truths. Your 30-year plan is super important. Like, you gotta be a technical rock star. Like, the assumptions you make, the way you use the tool, it's super important. And the competing truth is it's absolutely wrong. It's wrong. And we got to hold both those facts in our heads at the same time, which would lead us to language like, hey, I'm not sure, we're going to go this direction and see what shows up. And we see all this from agile software development, lean startup methodology. Like, everybody else is doing this, doctors, and we're holding on to certainty. If I could just get a better calculator. Right.
But it seems to me that this would be something that advisors would be leading with more and more now, because look, if you're an
mean
advisor,
reality, like just lead with reality.
yeah, well, no, the uncertainty concept of leading with the notion of like, hey, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in this plan, and we're going to make adjustments along the way. Because, look, if you're an advisor who's been, the average age of an advisor we always hear is like 60 years old. Okay, so if they've been in the business for 25 to 30 years, think about how much the world has changed in that 30 years that you've been in business, right? I mean, the internet didn't exist when you first started. And now people are, texting you on their cell phone, asking you to do things with their portfolio or whatever. Like, a lot has changed. We've seen recessions, we've seen financial crisis, we've seen a pandemic that clearly none of that stuff was baked into the original plan, right? So stuff has changed. Some of your clients got divorced or, whatever. It's like things happen. We're going to make assumptions, like you said, and we're probably going to have to make some adjustments because those assumptions were wrong.
We're absolutely going to have to make adjustments because they're wrong. And yeah, I think it's a real righteous trick. Nobody likes uncertainty. Like we are our brains. This isn't just some cute thing. It's like from the literature. Our brains are certainty-seeking machines. That's what we do. So nobody likes having a big bucket of cold uncertainty dumped on you. So the way we play this game is it's a righteous trick, and I use that phrase a lot. Righteous trick is different from bait and switch. Bait and switch is in service of the person selling something. Righteous trick is in service of the client we're trying to help. And so I think that's like we work at the presenting problem. Performance, my portfolio is blown up. Can you please help me? We have empathy around the presenting problem. Hey, performance is important. I understand, Mike, why you'd ask that question. It's important to me too. Then we pull a series of righteous tricks to help them understand that we need to at least guess at where they are, right? Then we start talking about like, let's try an experiment. Like I don't ever need to use the word uncertain. I can just say, hey, let's try a little experiment here. Where do you think you want to be in 10 years? So that posture is different from tell me what your goals are. And then me writing it down. And next time you tell me that I can remind you of what you said. And that, well, hey, how's the experiment going? Last time we talked, you wanted to be here. Does that still feel right? And by the way, it wouldn't surprise me, Mike, if that had changed. So we're giving people permission to live in reality, and we're trying to slowly remove the rug from underneath them that they were trying to grasp at for so long. Now, sometimes you can do this as a punch in the face. Like some clients will take a punch in the face, but mostly it's a series of empathetic hugs. Right? We can use examples like course corrections, right? We can say the pilot still draws a flight plan every time from New York to LA, but the pilot knows that it'll never go according to the plan, right? We can use examples like that. When we show up, when wrongness shows up, when reality shows up, we don't have to be defensive or angry or surprised. We can say, gosh, this was baked into the plan. I didn't know when or where, of course. I would never pretend to know that. But because life has changed the last 30 years, those events are in your plan. And I'm really good. Let's see what tools I've got in the backpack to figure out what to do next.
I love it.
So it's really changing the conversation. Yeah, it's honoring the emotion underlying it, but it's the role is changing too. It's not providing sort of specific answers that are going to hold up over the next 30 years, but it's basically presenting as a guide, right? When you take people up into the mountains, Carl, and it's their first time up there, they're doing the walk-in, they're doing the work, but maybe they need to know whether to go north or south. They need to know, oh, that's not a safe place to put your foot. Let's come over here a little bit. Those kinds of guide. And as new choices present themselves, you're right alongside the client, helping them deal with that emotional truth underlying everything, and then helping them make sense of those things and remake those choices. Because in some sense, what is that journey but remaking those choices again and again over time as circumstances change?
Yeah. Can I tell another story?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So first, let me comment real quickly on that. So from the literature on uncertainty, on navigating complex adaptive systems, and we don't have time here to explain the difference between it. If I were you, mean, one of my passions lately has been complexity theory, but understanding the difference between simple, complicated, and complex systems has been, and there's one layer above that, chaos. And we live clearly most of the time in complex and sometimes dipping into chaos, right? And adaptive is another important word. So complex, adaptive systems. An adaptive system is one that your interaction with the system actually changes it. So if you understand that from the literature, the way to get to the only way to navigate a complex adaptive system is to get really clear about where you are now, like orient yourself around reality. Like, where am I right now? So, we can use words like balance sheet and income statement. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're orient ourselves around, which, by the way, we all think that like that's quantifiable, so there's no emotions in it. Like, a balance sheet is nothing but a series of short, it's a work of nonfiction littered with fictional stories, right? So we got a balance sheet. We orient ourselves around where we are today. But from the literature, the only way to navigate a complex adaptive system, and I love this language, is to solve for the next local optimum. Right? The next local optimum. How good is that, right? Like, it's just the next step. Because once you take the next step, new information shows up that you couldn't have gotten. Like, you could Michael Kitces your way to it. Like, you could build the biggest spreadsheet. You could really think about it, and you still couldn't have gotten that information until you moved, because new information shows up in the movement because you changed the system. So now if you think of it as a labyrinth you're walking into, you're like, there's a blocked wall in front of you, and you change and a door opens. But you couldn't have seen that door unless you changed. So solve for the next local optimum, right? And in our language, we would just say, let's take a step. So my friend Brad, who's like a brother, we were up climbing in the Grand Tetons in Jackson. And we did this trip pretty regularly. And we'd go up and do it in a day. And it's like, you can move fast, really, really fast if you want to. But, at a relatively decent pace, it's a 12 to 15 hour day. And we leave at 1 a.m. from the parking lot, and it's a little rainy, which is not good. And in the summer, you want to be off that mountain early, because there's often afternoon thunderstorms, and you do not want to be up there during a thunderstorm. So you leave early. We're hiking up. It's kind of raining. And we literally had the conversation like, oh man, rain wouldn't be very good, would it? And we're like, you know what? We're out. We're having a walk in the mountains. It's just like, it's a long ways till we have at least 5 more hours till we have to make any sort of irreversible decision. So we just keep wandering. We wander up, and the rain gets heavier, and we keep wandering. And there's a few people coming down. Like, by the time it gets 2, 3, 4 in the morning, there's people coming down because they're like, oh, it's too rainy and too cold. And Brad and I looked at each other and we're like, you know what? Like, we have at least 2 more hours before we have to make a decision we can't reverse. So let's just see. We started using this phrase, let's see what the mountain gives us, which I just think is so beautiful. So we started saying, let's see what the mountain gives us. So we wander up, we make it to up to the saddle where there was a guide hut. The guides let us in the hut. We brew some tea. I remember somebody had some chocolate. Like, we each had a little piece of chocolate. Like, what's wrong with the day so far, right? Like, okay, it's rainy. We have this beautiful tea. We have some chocolate. And we're like, we had to get on the route right there. We're like, we're not ready to make that commitment yet. It's still raining pretty hard. And we're like, and it's getting colder. Sun's up now. And we're like, oh, you know what? There's another route, though, that will give us another 2 hours till we have to, like, once you got on the route, there was only one way down, which was to the top and down. So we were trying to delay that decision. Like, let's just see. Like, what's the worst that happens? We turn around. We had a great day, right? We walk up. We change the route. Hey, let's change the route. We go 2 more hours. We get up there. We're still not ready. But we're like, yeah, let's just sit under this rock for a bit, under this little cliff, before we rope up and get on the rock. Let's just sit here for a little bit, because I'm not ready to make a decision. Brewed another cup of tea. Right? Actually, I think, as I recall, almost fell asleep a little bit. Wake up, clouds blow out, everyone's gone. Get to the top of the mountain, blue sky, sun, fell asleep on the top of the mountain. Like, magical day. Now, it could have gone the other way. Like, it could have started thunder and lightning, and we would have had to turn around and never go. But it didn't matter. Like, what when we would have never known. We could have never, like, there was no radar to check. There was no way to know what was going to happen. So I love this idea of, let's see what the mountain gives us. I love the mountain guide. I think real financial planners are guides in a changing landscape, not defenders of outdated maps. And if we understand that, it shifts the focus of the job, right? Like you need to be a technical pro, yes. And you need to be comfortable navigating uncertainty. A technical pro, which is why I go on and on and on about resilience, right? And system general resilience, not event specific resilience. How can I look people in the eyes and say, I got you, even when I don't know what we're going to do next, right? Storm blows in, Brad has to reach across and grab me and go, Carl, hey, we got this. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're fine. I got tools. It's no problem. Right. So anyways, there you go.
Carl, one of the things that's jumped out to me in a most pleasant way possible in this conversation is something that I didn't expect to happen. So I'm thinking this whole conversation is going to be like, how do we break things down, the complex stuff down into simple stuff? And this guy draws these really simple pictures as, kind of the thing you're known for. So I was like, this is going to be awesome. But it turns out you're a master storyteller, right? Which is helping to articulate some of these points you want to make. And I love it. But one of the things that you remind me of earlier on in the conversation, when you kind of introduced some things was, this is an industry populated by advisors who answered an ad for security guards, right? Meaning that we hire anybody, and this always sounds offensive and it's actually not meant to be, but as a general rule, this industry will hire anybody who can fog a mirror and say, you can become a financial advisor. Now, everybody enters at different points, but we get large numbers of them in and some get out at some point in time. But a lot of times the people who succeed, they're either really good at sales or they're great with the math stuff we were just talking about there. But nowhere in the job description and in the training manual does it say, what you'd be really great is be a good storyteller, right? Help articulate some concepts. Because that story you talked about with the mountain of like, hey, we hit some turbulence effectively. Some things that made us nervous and uncomfortable and wondering if we should turn back and take all our chips out of them, go to cash as an example for thinking about a portfolio. No, why don't we go a little bit further and see what's on, why don't we take a rest for a second or whatever? Like that is such a wonderful way of articulating things. Do you have tips for getting better at storytelling? Are there resources that you have leaned on over the years or have you always been wired this way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, first of all, thank you. But yeah, it's a really good question. I think what I would do, and I talk about this a lot. Like I think your listeners are better at it than they think they are, and maybe not great. I don't know, but like just starting to pay attention, because what we need to do if we're going to change the world, which I believe we can, we need to do this at scale. And the only way to do it at scale is to, unfortunately, we're in a position where we have to show, not tell, because all the words we could use to tell people, like nobody cares that you're a fiduciary. Nobody cares. It's terribly sad to admit. But nobody cares. Nobody cares about your efficient portfolio. Nobody cares about your life insurance stuff. In fact, nobody cares about your solutions. Right? They care about their problems. And so any word you would use about solutions or the things you think people care about have lost their meaning. Like, you can trust me. I'm a wealth manager. I'll build a mini family office. Like, we've seen all these on the TV now. So the only way to get this across is just to tell stories about the impact that you've had in people's lives. And you can do it in a way, don't give me your compliance excuse. Like, I just don't even start with compliance. Like, you can do it in a way, I can take a client experience and I can say, I was having, and I can't lie. So if I was having a conversation with a client at lunch and I considered this client a friend, I can say publicly, I was having a conversation with a friend at lunch and the topic of risk came up. And, I was having a conversation with a friend at lunch named Denise, and Denise was telling me about this amazing experience she recently had with building the pottery barn in her backyard. You know, Denise and I have been talking about that pottery studio in the backyard. Denise and I have been talking about that pottery studio for 10 years. And she's taken a series of actions over the last 10 years to get her there, right? And really, to me, what Denise really makes, like what Denise did, I think of that as financial planning. Like, I never use that. That's not a case study. It's not a client testimonial. It's just a story. And so we just get better at recognizing one way to do this is just when the client tells you, hey, thanks for this. You made this happen. Write it down. Write it down. Put it in a book, because if it's in a book, it's not marketing. I learned that from Larry Swedrow, right? Like, you go read Larry's books and he describes exactly how they invest the money with returns, right? Like, well, because it was in a book. So I just think we need to get better at recognizing the value of what we do. The story you use to explain asset allocation, you've been using it so long, you've forgotten. The analogy that you use to describe risk, you've just forgotten that those are valuable. You're doing it so well. You've been doing it for so long, you've forgotten. So I would just start. One habit that I would love to see more people do is, would you just write or speak something every day in public? Like, I have a daily podcast. Behavior Gap Radio is every day except Saturdays and Sundays. So it's every weekday. It's $10 a month. It's a subscription podcast. I just recorded episode like 680, and I've got 5,000 ideas in the folder. So anyway, that's how you do it. You just practice. It's a muscle. You're going to be terrible at it at first. You know what the good news is? Nobody's going to be listening anyway, so it's fine. Nobody's going to be reading it anyway. It's your mom and your sister. Right?
Dude, I tell people that all the time. Like, when you start podcasting or doing video or whatever, like, just so you know, you are going to suck at it at first. I've been doing this since 2007. You're probably not going to be as good at this as I am when you start, but trust me, just be yourself and get working. You'll be surprised at how good you get and how quickly you get there.
Yeah, and the good news is, why you suck, nobody's going to be listening to you anyway, because it's just your mom and your sister. So it's perfect correlation. Both of those are reasons people don't start. People don't start because they're terrible. People also don't start because nobody's going to listen. Actually, if you think of both of those as a benefit, like, while I'm practicing, no one's going to listen. Then it's suddenly like, okay, the only way, you should be familiar with this. You tell people to save $50 a month when they're 12, and they are like, dude, whatever, $50 a month, that's stupid. And we're saying the only way to get to the exciting part of that curve, I think of it as compound influence or compound impact. The only way to get to the exciting part is go through the boring part. And this is one last rant. We're so busy looking for shortcuts through the boring part of the compound influence curve that we realize, if I could draw this, right? Like, if you just drew the compound impact, or if you drew compound interest, the steep end of the curve is the exciting part. Warren Buffett's next double is the exciting part, right? $50 and $50 and $50 is not exciting. But if we were to draw what most of us do, it's just a circle. It's like a treadmill. And it takes us way longer. So the only shortcut, the best shortcut, the fastest shortcut, is to acknowledge there is no shortcut and start doing the work, because you'll wake up 2 or 3 years from now and be like, oh my gosh, people care, right?
The best shortcut is straight through.
Yeah.
Do the work.
No shortcut.
I don't know if our audience is going to have the same sense that I do here listening to all of these ideas, Carl, but I'm struck that simultaneously what you're talking about feels very new and very cutting edge, while at the same time being completely timeless. It's on the timeless side of things that I was really struck with this image, that you're talking about ideas about the way that humans have communicated for 40,000 years, cave painting and storytelling, right? But now applied in this modern financial context. And that's what makes it powerful. It's so grounded in sort of who we are as a species, but then used for good to accomplish these financial goals with clients. So I'm hoping that everyone's having the same experience I am.
That's nice of you. Yeah, I just think it's all I care about. I don't know what to call it. All I know is that I think I care about financial advisors deeply as humans, but I care almost more about them as leverage points to make deep change in the world. Because I just see, like I was just at XYPN and I just look out and see 600 people. And I don't see 600 people. I see 600 people times 100 clients. I see 600 people times 100 clients plus 3 kids. I see 1,000 people on each newsletter list. I see 700 connections on LinkedIn. And suddenly when you start to do that math, you're like, we collectively have the ability to change the lives of millions and millions of people. And as far as I know, there's only one way to do that, and that's through a human, and largely I'm not saying like tech-enabled human advisor, right?
Sure.
And so that's what drives me about the work. And if there's, obviously in fact, a new project I'm working on right now is just what do the wisdom traditions have to say about money? That's a whole nother story, right? Like it turns out that the wisdom traditions are reckless. I mean, these people, Jesus and Buddha, they are reckless financial planners.
Oh yeah.
And I say
Flipping tables over.
I say that with deep respect, but they are reckless. The words they used about money, we would, if somebody put those in a blind taste test, we would say that's reckless. And yet they all say it. All the wisdom traditions say the same thing. Like, what are you worried about? Stop it. What manner of men would build a barn, fill it up, and then build another one, Jesus says, dripping with sarcasm? And we're all busy building more barns. So that turns out there's a lot of stuff that's been around a long time that might be valuable for us to think about.
Fantastic. This is great. Well, Carl, I cannot tell you how wonderful this was for me. I didn't know what to expect. I purposely did relatively little research on you before you came on the show. And so, spent a couple of minutes on the site and so forth. Well, this is going to be fantastic. And it was fantastic. I loved it. So thank you very much for coming on the show. We're going to send people to behaviorgap.com. Where else should we send people if they want to follow up with more of Carl Richards?
Yeah. So, the easy thing to do, probably behaviorgap.com or Behavior Gap Radio. And then on the advisor side, and I can't talk much about this, if you go to the societyofadvice.com, there'll be dragons there. And there's a box that asks you to take a leap. And I can't tell you anything else. So the societyofadvice.com.
There's literally a dragon there. I love it.
Yeah.
Secret society. Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Cheers, my friends.
Great.
It was super fun. Thanks, John. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Carl, great catching up, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Augmented Advisor podcast. It was fantastic to have you with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Huge thanks to Carl Richards from the Behavior Gap for joining us. It's always a really big pleasure to have somebody on the show or get to spend some time with someone who, frankly, elevates your game. Carl is that kind of guy, and I hope you felt the same way. As I mentioned at the top of the show, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And do us a favor, make sure you give the Blue Leaf page on LinkedIn a follow. We share every episode of this podcast on LinkedIn, and we have a lot of other conversations there, and we would love to have you be part of the community. Okay, that's it for today. Please make sure you're staying safe and be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Augmented Advisor podcast.